a very big protest, and it's called Don't Touch the Sanctuaries, and it's been organized because on the 20th of September, the state authorities, the police, entered an animal sanctuary at Cuore Liberi called, basically to kill some of the pigs that were within that sanctuary because of an African swine fever scare and of the presence of African swine fever in the region. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, to the importance of always being connected as an activist academic space to do the protest that happening, and also because I think it's really important action that is happening in our fight for total liberation, to understand how safe are the spaces that we like to think that are safe, which are animal sanctuaries, right? So now I think we can begin the session about the student journal of vegan sociology. So you may already know that the student journal of vegan sociology is committed to supporting vegan knowledge production in the field of sociology, and as well as to make it more accessible to students and independent researchers. So our somebody posted I think somebody posted a link that to the call for papers. We are accepting papers right now, and also two of the issues already exist, and you can find them on the Vegan Sociology website. It really is an opportunity to look for like the freshest research from students, and also to send your research. And it is also a place where we learn together. So currently we have some listings open if you want to be part of the collective. These are more information about them is on the website, and Zoe will also be listing them in the business meeting tomorrow. So looking forward to have some of you interested in this and working together. Yeah, so maybe we can start, and maybe Bushara can introduce the two speakers we have today and say more about the current issue.
Okay, thank you, Mara. For the contribution in our second volume of the student Journal of Vegan Sociology makes space for this sociological possibility by examining more than human view in education, taking intersectional perspective over vegan social identity, and deliberating practice of speciesist consumption. So our first article by A. Christina Barth and Stephen Avanzato Grissner, Perspective on Diversity in Education, examines the meaning of diversity in different fields from social to natural science, arguing that a better, more comprehensive understanding of the concept is necessary. The second two articles will be presented within this session by Julia and Nathan. Julia is article of Julia Veganism and the Social Identity of Race, Gender and Sexuality. Consider how social identity might facilitate or inhibit engagement with veganism. She's currently working on a doctorate in public health science at the University of Waterloo, Canada, and Julia's current research is focused on veganism and well-being. Our final article by Nathan Poirier, Three Paradox of Eating Animal, reflect on the persistence of non-veganism in an area of severe climate crisis. Nathan Poirier will graduate from Michigan State University with a PhD in sociology in August 2023, with graduate specialization in critical animal study and women and gender study. Nathan has held co-leadership role at the Institute for Critical Animal Study, Student for Critical Animal Study, and the Journal for Critical Animal Study.
Okay, so let me check with someone. Do you see the slide there, title slide? Okay, good. All right. So thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. So I do have the paper titled Three Sociological Paradoxes of Eating Animals in second issue of Student Journal for Vegan Sociology. This presentation, I plan on sort of barely covering that paper and really trying to move in a little bit of a sort of different direction that also I think speaks more closely to the theme of this panel and this conference. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the reason of writing the paper, or more about writing the article in general. So the paper that appears in the Student Journal for Vegan Sociology is actually the third iteration of this paper. So this was originally written for one of my first classes as part of the Canisius College Anthrozoology Master's Program. It was originally a much longer version and covered more aspects of veganism. Then 3 years later, I redrafted it as a writing sample for my PhD program at Michigan State University. And then 3 years later, revisited it once more to revise for the Student Journal of Vegan Sociology. So this was the first time I've ever done something like that with a paper, revisited it years apart with kind of fresh eyes and from a better educated perspective. So it was really enjoyable to do that and to work in kind of progressing viewpoints. And so the main reason for the article originally that I wrote it is I wanted to look at problems associated with eating animals in general and do so from a sociological perspective. And so then my ultimate point with the paper was to then put forth veganism as a best practice to minimize all of the problems associated with it. And so after writing the first version of the paper, I came across the book Food and Society, which is a sociology of food text by Guptill et al. And they framed the sociology of food in general around paradoxes. And after reading that book, I realized I could reframe this paper around the same thing because Guptill et al. Don't really talk about veganism. They don't really talk about eating animals. So I took that framework and applied it to this paper. So in particular, I discussed three paradoxes, and one of those is violence. And so I subtitled that section The Barbarity of Civility. And the point of that section is to talk about and show how with civilizing discourse and the notion of civilization is often based around these notions of refinement and peace. But if you look at the role of animal oppression in those developments, then a lot of violence and brutality is exposed. So the second paradox had to do with speciesism, and I subtitled that Falling on Our Own Swords, because in that section, I argue that speciesism often is used to separate humans from non-humans, but such a thinking and the acts that follow from that thinking end up negatively affecting all humans as well, not just the humans that are particularly animalized, but even the archetypical speciesist. And then thirdly, I look at non-industrial animal agriculture and call this paradox the invisibility of ubiquity, which I think that phrase was taken right from Guptill et al., one of their paradoxes, and applied to this specific situation. And so that one's, I think, pretty straightforward there, in that the idea of non-industrial animal agriculture is basically to render the violence and the speciesism of animal farming all that more invisible and therefore less problematic. So that's the overview of the paper, and I would like to go in a little bit of a different direction from here and really start to look at intersectionality fused with veganism. And so I want to start by talking about Eva Gerard's book, Veganism, from 2021, and I have a copy of the actual table of contents here. So Gerard's biggest thing with this book was to frame veganism as more than a diet and to keep it that way. So she's realizing veganism historically was based as more than a diet and wants to keep it that way from others who might have it veer off to only a diet. And so essentially how I read Gerard's book was some sort of reformulating or refashioning of Julia Felice's Consistent Anti-Oppression, which Julia has built up in a number of books with other contributors. However, there isn't acknowledgement of this. And I really would have liked to see it, because it basically seemed like Girard's point was to try to copy what Feliz was doing in perhaps a larger scope, but also I think not quite as well. And so there's two particular issues that I didn't like from Girard's book, and that is that there's only a single chapter on intersectional veganism. We can see it there. It's chapter 6. And so to me, I didn't particularly just like this sort of setup because I think all veganism should automatically inherently be intersectional. And I think if it's not, then that's a problem. And that's something people need to work on. So putting intersectional veganism in one chapter only, I feel like has the effect of sequestering that aspect of veganism when it should be front and center and suffused everywhere. Secondly, the chapter on intersectional veganism, which is basically veganism of color to Girard, is chapter 6 out of 8. So in other words, other things are front and center. And these other first few chapters are largely written by white people. They're largely white debates. And so again, this, I think, setting up of intersectional veganisms 3/4 of the way through a book presents more of an afterthought of veganism, not as central of a component as I think it absolutely should be. So then thinking a little bit more about intersectionality. So turning to some Black feminists, Patricia Hill Collins, in a 1995 short paper, drew a distinction in terms of two components of intersectionality. One she called interlocking oppressions, and this, she said, was more of a macro view to study macro sociological happenings, and in particular that was to look at how different systems of oppression were linked. So I kind of think of this as the bottom to top sort of direction of people looking upwards at systems and studying how they are connected. And then Collins called intersectionality a micro focus, and that was a focus on how individuals and groups are affected by those systems of oppression. So this is looking towards pretty clearly more the individual level, so a smaller kind of a top-down approach, looking from the system to the individual and seeing how the effects go that way. And so then this is, I think, a useful framing, because they're basically two sides of intersectionality. They're basically two versions of intersectionality. And a lot of people, including a lot of Black women, a lot of Black feminists, have really tried to police the use of intersectionality and its applications and keep it strictly to a certain number of key individuals and used in very certain ways. And so Jennifer Nash in 2019 published the book Black Feminism Reimagined with subtitle After Intersectionality. And basically the whole point of Nash's book was to say, this is not a good approach. It's contradictory to a lot of fundamental tenets of Black feminism, of not policing people, bodies, thoughts, so on. So Nash's big thesis is, let's open intersectionality up to quote unquote outside critiques. Let's let go of this sort of fundamentalism within intersectionality, and let's kind of let this see where this goes, and see the everything intersectionality could possibly be. So with that, I kind of have my own little critique here of intersectionality, and so it is based in examples from the Combahee River Collective, the CRC. And their famous statement. So that was, if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all of the systems of oppression. Right? It's a very famous statement coming from about the little pamphlet 50 years ago. And then the table on the bottom is a very similar idea, but it's my sort of just organization of some thoughts of Bell Hooks in her book Feminist Theory. And so she talks about this sort of matrix, you might think of it as, of domination as well, by asserting that Black males, while they may be victims of racism, or at least vulnerable to that, they do enjoy male privilege and are generally allowed to socially exploit women. And then white women, while they are victims or vulnerable to sexism, enjoy white privilege and are socially generally allowed to exploit Black people. And so then Hooks talks about Black women and says they have a unique social position, very much like the CRC saying above, where they are victims of racism and sexism both, but that Black women are exploiters of none. And so these two ideas are different, but they're certainly very similar. They both position Black women at the bottom of the social hierarchy and look upwards from there. but I think both of them could look downwards. And I think below this group of Black women in general is still non-humans. And so I would disagree with bell hooks here and say that Black women are not exploiters of none. I think they very frequently are exploiters of non-humans. But I also want to be clear here. This is not, I'm a fan of the CRC's statement here, particularly their assertion of anti-capitalism, which is often missing in a lot of social justice movements. And I'm also a big fan of bell hooks. I really enjoy her work, just about everything she writes. And this is only one small point in one thing she says that I think people can extend, in particularly a vegan view on intersectionality. So then just some concluding thoughts. So the point of the paper originally in SJVS was to assert the centrality of veganism to all other social justice causes, because that discourse is often left out. Something animal studies, vegan sociology has been working to, critical animal studies have been working to insert back in. So this was something I wanted to do, and particularly focus on this issue of violence within that. But also vice versa. Every other cause should have veganism as part of, veganism should include all other causes as well. So basically, just the very seeds here of getting towards something that really combines everything all together all the time, which again, I think Julia Feliz has really done already very well. I also think veganism must consistently be resisted and contrasted to just a diet. This is much too strong of a current. It's much too easy to fall into, and I do think it's somewhat unfortunate, but we need to continue to resist veganism being seen as only a diet and assert it as much, much, much more. And then lastly, a final point, not necessarily connected to what I was saying here, but I think in general, we need to be careful not to oversaturate the vegan discourse. And so this is not just true with veganism, but basically across the board in any sort of academic publishing. Many publications contribute very little to the literature or are rehashings of previous ideas. And so within veganism, I think we really need to focus on quality over quantity and really make sure the things that are being put out there are meaningful, that they are critical, that they are really at destabilizing the status quo, and including as many social justice causes together as we can. So with that, I am done.
Thank you, Nathan.